So we move on to the final part of AC 3.2, where we are looking at the contribution of agencies to achieving social control. And in this particular part, we are looking at institutional tactics and gaps in the state provision. So let's start off. So institutions, particularly prisons, can use a variety of methods to reduce deviant behaviour and achieve social control. So as we've seen previously, institutions such as prisons, young offenders may use token economies as a way of encouraging desirable behaviour among inmates. The use of the incentives and earned privilege system might be used by prisons to encourage acceptable behaviour. And institutions come in many different shapes and sizes, from families to schools, workplaces, religious organisations, armies, prisons, etc. However, all institutions have rules about how their members must behave, along with punishments for breaking them and rewards for conforming. And I give you some old Victorian school rules, which are quite interesting to see. School rules have changed a lot now. So, if we look at our criminal justice institutions, we have the courts. What can they do? Well, they can sentence offenders to various punishments. This can be used to achieve both individual and general deterrence. Punishment may put the convicted offender off repeating their crime, and they also serves as a lesson to the public in general. So that's a method by which an institution achieves social control. The courts can issue a community order which requires offenders to rehabilitate, for example, undergoing drug addiction treatment. The aim here is to enable them to change their behavioural patterns. So that, again, is how an institution, the courts, achieves social control. If we look at the probation service, they supervise and monitor the behaviour of offenders, whether they're serving a community sentence or they've been released from prison on licence. Now, if the offender fails to meet the requirements of their licence, they can be returned to prison or to court for resentencing. And this figure, as you can see from the chart here, has been rising steadily over the past years. So again, another way of achieving social control. The prison service, well, they have a set of prison rules and they apply to all prisons. A prison governor can also add further local rules for their prison, and the prison rules cover the following offences for prison. Now, when questions have been asked on this in the past, it tends to stick around the prison system. So I would know these. You've got token economy and IEPs, but you need to know about what powers governors have to ensure that prisoners behave within their institution. So the rules in all our prisons in the UK and Wales are that prisoners have to behave they're not allowed to behave in a way that could offend, threaten or hurt someone. They're not allowed to stop prison staff from doing their jobs. They're not allowed to escape. They're not allowed to use drugs or alcohol. Tobacco is classed as a drug. They are not allowed to commit any sexual or indecent offences while they're in prison. They're not allowed to damage the prison. They're not allowed to be in possession of forbidden items such as a mobile phone or a knife. They're not allowed to be somewhere in the prison where they shouldn't be. And they have to do as the staff tell them, not disobey. And breaking the rules, if they're out of prison for a short time, working or something, they're not allowed to break the rules. We're out of prison for a short time. So all of those are rules that are in all of our prisons. So if they break those rules, they will receive some form of sanction. So these sanctions you need to know, and there's a range of them, and they include, they could get a caution, so if they do it again, it'll be a more severe punishment. They can lose their earned privileges for up to 84 days. Also, if they're on IEP, they can be moved from standard to basic or enhanced to standard, etc. They could be confined to their cell sometimes called solitary confinement. In this country, the maximum you can confine someone in solitary confinement is 35 days, so 5 weeks. They can be stopped from working or from receiving money earned from working. They can be stopped from doing work with other prisoners for up to 21 days. They can't work with other prisoners. They can be taken away from the prison wing or living unit for 28 days. And they can have a payback punishment, an unpaid time limited project in prison, such as teaching prisoners to take personal responsibility for their actions and work towards being rehabilitated through helping others, or make amends for their behaviour by undertaking projects that benefit the prison community. All of these are examples of punishments that could be given out by a prison governor for breaking any of those prison rules. More serious offences can lead to having up to 42 extra days added to a prisoner's sentence. So the governor has the power to add 42 days, 7 weeks, to a prisoner's sentence if they commit a serious offence. If they escape, the likelihood is they'll be moved to a higher security prison with more restrictions. So if you escape from a Cat C prison, you're likely to move to a Cat B or a Cat A prison, where it's higher security, there are more restrictions. So worth knowing what the rules are and what the punishments are within prison for breaking those rules. The two key ones are the maximum solitary confinement for 35 days. I would certainly learn that one. And the fact that you can get 42 extra days added to your sentence by the governor for a serious offence. Now, a lot of punishments given by institutions involve what's called phased discipline or stage discipline. And it's a really common method used by institutions to achieve social control. So usually a first offence, whether in prison or in the wider society, is often dealt with more leniently. So loss of privileges for a few days, a warning, a police caution, a conditional discharge. If you repeat the offence, particularly if it's more serious, then you're likely to get more stronger sanctions, such as probation or in prison, an attempt to deter future misbehaviour. So this is what we mean by phased discipline. As you commit more offences, the punishments get harsher. So here you've got an example of where Levi Belfield, a very famous prisoner, killed Millie Dowler, is stripped of his prison. He's been involved in a brawl with 2 inmates, and therefore he's stripped of his right to watch telly and wear his own clothes. So that's his punishment for breaking prison rules. So those are institutional tactics. The other thing that this AC asks us to look at is gaps in the state provision. And what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that all the agencies of social control, such as the police, the CPS, the courts, prison separation service, etc., they can all achieve some degree of control over criminal antisocial behaviour, but it's never going to be complete. And this part of the AC is looking at what are the reasons for why they can't achieve social control. What are the barriers to it? What are those gaps that mean that they can't do what they want to do? And one of the main things is resources, because they're all funded. All the state agencies are funded effectively, most of them, by public taxes. And there are limits to how much taxpayers are willing to pay for these agencies. So governments face competing demands for resources from other sectors such as the health service, education, pensions, welfare, local authority service, defence, etc., etc. They're all competing for a limited pot of money. And if you look at this pie chart here, this is what the government spent their money on in the year 2024-2025. So this is all the money that the government had, and it's all divided up between different areas. So you can see the vast majority there. We had 131 spent on education, 71 billion on defence, transport, building roads and that sort of stuff, 59 billion. But the two big chunks are health, that's the NHS, 251 billion, and social protection. Now, you might think the social protection has got something to do with criminology. It hasn't. This is pensions and looking after old people. So that's what we mean by social protection. It's by far the biggest chunk of all we spend. Now, when it comes to what we are looking at in criminology, that is public order and safety, 47 billion. And that has to go on the whole of the criminal criminal justice service. So a large amount of money, but of course they're all competing for it. And each year health service will demand more, and if health service demand more, it's got to come off one of these things. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of resources. So to give you some examples to quote, budget cuts lead to a reduction in resources. Now, since the financial crisis of 2008, government spending cuts and reorganisations have had a huge impact on state agencies. It's reduced their effectiveness in maintaining social control, without a shadow of a doubt. For example, between 2010 and 2018, the police budget was cut by 19%, and that meant that there were 20,000 less police officers. Now, the reality is, if you have 20,000 less police officers, you are going to detect less crime and you are going to investigate less crime. So the crime rate is going to go up. And despite what politicians will tell you, you can't escape from that fact. Now, we have now rebuffed our police force, so there's 20,000 police officers are now back in 2026. We're just about back to where we were in 2010, a little over. So that is bound to have effect on social control. At the same time, the CPS budget was cut by 25% and the organisation lost a third of its staff. So that means the Crown Prosecution Service are going to have less staff, so it takes them longer to bring a case to court, which means that court cases take longer. There's a longer wait for the case to be prepared, which means that if someone's held in remand in prison awaiting their trial, that's going to take that's going to increase the prison numbers. So all this stuff has a knock-on effect. At the same time, they cut the prison budget by 16% and staff levels by 15%, and over the same time the prison population doubled. So you have double the amount of prisoners and 15% less staff and 16% less money for double the amount of people. And that is why there's been less education in prison, less schooling in prison, less work being done in prison, and prisoners are spending more time in their cells. So they're banged up for 23 hours a day. That's going to lead to rises in mental health issues, rises in suicide attempts, rises in the use of drugs because they're bored senseless, and that therefore means they're not rehabilitated, and if they're not rehabilitated, when they come out of prison, they reoffend, which means they go back to prison, which means the prison numbers go up, which creates the chaos that we are in at the moment. And despite what you may be told by various politicians, them's the reality. That is what happened between 2010 and 2018. And we're paying for that now with rising, the prison population being at capacity. Because at the same time, because the budget was cut and they doubled the amount of prisoners, they hardly built any new prisons whatsoever. So that is some of the things that you need to get into as you start to evaluate the reasons behind the effectiveness of some of the agencies within the criminal justice system. You could say the police aren't doing a very good job, but there may be reasons behind why they're not effective. You could say that prisons are in crisis, but there may be a reason why that is the way it is. So, as another barrier that comes to social control is new technology. And this is quite an interesting one. So another reason why our agencies are less able to achieve social control is the extra burden imposed on criminal investigations by digital technology. So in 2018, the head of the CPS said that the criminal justice system was unable to cope with the huge amounts of data being generated by technology. She added, in one recent rape case where they met on Tinder, it took 600 police hours to go through the digital material. You can have a judge saying, I want to download of that iPad, and it will take 15 officers working all weekend to get it. Now, obviously, rape case is very serious. They've got to do it. But if it takes that amount of time, those police officers are not out investigating crime. And when I go back to when I had my first ever home PC, which we back in round about 90, the internal hard drive, and it was a big one, was 360 megabytes. Now a photo is 360 megabytes. This PowerPoint will be gigabytes of data. So how things have moved on, the amount of data that's stored is massive. And of course, if it's involved in criminal investigation, it takes many, many man hours. So just problems checking mobile phones for evidence have led to failures to disclose evidence and a fall in the number of rape and sexual offence charges. So all these things, this new technology has a knock-on effect. And the cost of using new technology, such as DNA profiling, which has been has meant that innocent people have been freed from prison at the same time guilty people have been caught due to it. All of these things cost money, and it poses a limitation on the police's ability to investigate offences if they don't have the money to pay for the DNA profiling, etc. So another issue that stops agencies from achieving social control, unreported crime. Criminal justice agencies can only investigate, prosecute and convict if the offence has been reported, and only about 40% of crimes are reported to the police, and different kinds of crime have different reporting rates. So here you see a chart that looks at estimated amount of victims of domestic abuse, which is round about in 2024 2.3 million, recorded by the police 851,000. So only 1 in 4 rapes and attempted rapes are reported, it's thought. An estimated 2.3 million domestic abuse cases occurred 23-24, but not all reported. And as you can see, only 851,062 recorded. And of course, white collar and corporate crime, as we know, often go unreported because people may be unaware they've been victims, for example, of fraud, overcharging, or environmental pollution. And existing laws can also provide a barrier to the agencies of social control, because you can only achieve social control as long as the appropriate laws are in place to begin with. So what happens is, with new technologies particularly, a new type of harm emerges, but there's no existing law to forbid it. And so the state agencies aren't able to bring prosecutions to control the harmful behaviour because it's not legislated against in law. So examples of new laws that had to be brought in to deal with these sort of things. So in 2022, all new properties built in England from 22 onwards have to have an EV charging point installed as standard because of the move towards net zero. But more importantly, the way that phones have changed over the years. Previously, it was illegal to text or make a phone call while you're in the car, but of course now phones do a lot more than that. So in 2022, laws went further to ban drivers from using their mobile phones to take photos or videos, scroll through playlists or play games in addition to making a call or sending text. So all that bit had to be added to the law because it wasn't allowed for. It was a new technology that just come through. So texting or calling while driving was already illegal, but even now, selecting a song can land you with a £200 fine or 6 points. This rule applies, and you may not realise this, even if you're stopped at a red light. So you could still use your hands free while driving, such as a sat nav, if it's secured in a cradle. You might ask, well, what's the difference? Well, that's the law. So there we have it. And finally, social media. This causes a real problem for agencies for social control. There's been a lot of debate about the responsibilities of social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, X, YouTube for offensive and harmful material that appears on them. For example, the right-wing terrorist, this guy here, who massacred 51 Muslims in mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019, was able to live stream his crimes on social media. So these are some of the images of him going into a mosque and massacring 51 Muslims, and the whole thing was streamed live on social media, and social media did nothing to stop it being streamed. So if such material was published in a traditional way, such as a film, a book, or a newspaper article, the person that's published it would be held criminally liable. However, social media companies claim they're not the publishers, and in the UK they cannot currently, well, that's not quite true, be prosecuted for the material found on their sites. In reality, they can now, because the Online Safety Act went some way to, of 2023 went some way to addressing this issue. But prior to the Online Safety Act, when this thing was being done, the social media company said, well, we didn't publish the material, so therefore we are not responsible. You need to speak to this guy. So if in this PowerPoint I suddenly started having a rant about, well, I'm not going to have a rant and I'll say what I might have a rant about, but if I said something hateful and discriminatory, incited people to violence, said go around and firebomb this person or that person, I would be held responsible. But you might argue, well, should YouTube stop that from happening? Well, under the Online Safety Act, they are going some way to do that. And this link here will let you have a look at that and see what it says. So that's finally this AC done, part 3 done. Hopefully you found it of use, and I might see you soon for some more. Who knows? Take care. Have a good day.